The 1960s gave us legendary trucks like the Ford F-100, Chevrolet C10, and Dodge D-Series. But what about the trucks that failed? The ones that disappointed thousands of buyers and became cautionary tales in automotive history? Before we dive in, if you love classic trucks and automotive history, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Today, we're exposing the 8 worst pickup trucks of the 1960s. These are popular models that people actually bought thinking they were getting quality trucks. Instead, they got problems, headaches, and regrets. Some of these might surprise you. Let's get started. Number 8. 1960 to 1966 Chevrolet C10. Coming in at number 8, and this is going to be controversial, we have the 1960 to 1966 Chevrolet C10. Wait, the C10? One of the most beloved classic trucks ever made? Yes, but hear me out. These early models had serious problems that people don't talk about anymore. The 1960 to 1966 C10 came with the 230 cubic inch inline 6 producing just 140 horsepower, or the 283 cubic inch V8 with 175 horsepower. On paper, decent engines for the era. But here's what went wrong. These trucks were notorious for developing rust in the cab corners, rockers, and especially the floor pans. The metal quality simply wasn't good, and within 5 years, many of these trucks were rotting from the inside out. The independent front suspension, while providing a better ride than competitors, was prone to failures. Ball joints wore out quickly, and the control arm bushings needed constant replacement. Repairs were expensive for the time. Number 7. 1961 to 1966 Ford F-100. At number 7, another controversial choice, the 1961 to 1966 Ford F-100. Ford sold hundreds of thousands of these trucks, making them incredibly common. But common doesn't mean good, and these F-100s had issues that frustrated owners for years. The base engine was the 223 cubic inch inline 6 with 135 horsepower. Ford also offered the 292 cubic inch V8 with 164 horsepower, and later the 352 and 390 cubic inch V8s. Power wasn't the problem. The real issue was the twin I-beam front suspension. Ford marketed it as revolutionary, providing car-like ride with truck durability. In reality, it was a maintenance nightmare. The twin I-beam design caused excessive tire wear due to poor alignment characteristics. The camber couldn't be properly adjusted, so tires wore unevenly and needed frequent replacement. This was expensive and frustrating for working truck owners. Number 6. 1964 to 1966 Dodge D100. Number 6 is the 1964 to 1966 Dodge D100. Specifically these mid-60s models. Dodge had redesigned the D100 in 1961 with beautiful styling, but by the mid-60s the quality control had completely fallen apart. These trucks became known for being poorly assembled and unreliable. The standard engine was the 225 cubic slant 6 with 145 horsepower. Dodge also offered the 318 cubic V8 with 230 horsepower and the 361 cubic V8 with 265 horsepower. The engines themselves were actually quite good. The problem was everything else. These trucks rusted faster than any competitor. The cab corners would rust through within 3 years in salt states. The bed floors developed holes quickly. The fenders rusted from the inside out. The electrical systems were disasters. Voltage regulators failed constantly. Headlight switches burned out. The dash gauges stopped working. Wiring harnesses corroded and caused shorts. The manual transmissions, particularly the 3-speed column shift, had weak synchronizers that wore out quickly. Shifting became difficult, and eventually they'd grind going into gear. Number 5. We have the 1960 to 1963 GMC C1000 pickup. GMC was General Motors' truck division, and the C1000 was essentially a Chevrolet C10 with different badges and trim. You'd think being related to the Chevy would make it equally popular, but GMC made critical mistakes. The C1000 used the same engines as Chevrolet, the 230 cubic inch six-cylinder with 140 horsepower, and various V8 options, including the 283, 305, and 327 cubic inch engines. Here's where GMC went wrong. They positioned the C1000 as a premium truck and charged significantly more than the equivalent Chevrolet, sometimes 15 to 20% more. Buyers paid extra for virtually the same truck with a different grille. Number 4 is the 1965 to 1968 Ford F-250, the heavy-duty version of the F-Series. Ford's 3/4-ton truck should have been a workhorse champion. Instead, it became known for catastrophic failures that left owners stranded and angry. The F-250 came with larger engines than the F-100, the 300 cubic inch inline-six with 150 horsepower, the 352 cubic inch V8 with 208 horsepower, and the massive 390 cubic inch V8 with up to 270 horsepower. Strong powertrains. The critical failure point was the rear axle. Ford used a semi-floating rear axle design that couldn't handle the loads F-250 buyers were putting on these trucks. The axle shafts would snap, sometimes catastrophically, leaving the truck immobilized. When an axle shaft broke, the wheel could actually separate from the truck, an extremely dangerous failure. This happened frequently enough that it became a known problem, yet Ford didn't recall the trucks or redesign the axle. The leaf spring rear suspension was inadequate for the advertised payload capacity of 2,500 to 3,000 pounds. The springs would sag permanently after heavy hauling, destroying the truck's handling and appearance. Number 3, 1960 to 1966 Chevrolet C20. Coming in at number 3, we have the 1960 to 1966 Chevrolet C20, Chevy's 3/4-ton offering. The C20 was supposed to be Chevrolet's answer to heavy-duty truck buyers. Instead, it became a lesson in how not to build a work truck. Chevrolet offered the C20 with the 292 cubic inch inline-six producing 165 horsepower and V8 options including the 283, 327, and 409 cubic inch engines. The 409 was a performance engine adapted for truck use, producing up to 340 horsepower. Here's the problem. The chassis couldn't handle what the engines could deliver. The frames were identical to the C10 half-ton trucks, just with stiffer springs. This was inadequate engineering. Under heavy loads, the frames would flex excessively, causing stress cracks to develop around the mounting points. Door gaps would change when the bed was loaded. Cab mounts would tear loose. The rear axle used a full floating design, which was good, but the gear ratios were wrong for the truck's weight and payload. The ring and pinion gears would whine and eventually fail under sustained heavy use. At number 2, we have the 1961 to 1968 International Harvester Travelette. This was International's crew cab pickup, one of the first 4-door trucks marketed to consumers. Sounds innovative, right? But the execution was terrible. The Travelette used International's truck engines, the 196 cubic inch 4-cylinder with 93 horsepower, the 232 cubic inch 6-cylinder with 111 horsepower, and various V8 options up to 345 cubic inches. The problem was the extended cab design. International stretched the wheelbase to 119 or 140 inches to accommodate the rear doors, but didn't properly reinforce the frame. This created a flexible, weak structure. The truck would twist and flex over rough roads, causing all sorts of problems. The doors wouldn't close properly, the cab would leak water, the rear window would crack from the frame flexing. The ride quality was punishing. And number 1, 1965 to 1966 Ford F-100 Custom Cab. And the #1 worst pickup truck of the 1960s is the 1965 to 1966 Ford F-100 Custom Cab. Wait, another Ford F-100? Yes, but specifically these custom cab models. Ford introduced this upscale trim level to compete with Chevrolet's more luxurious offerings. It was a disaster. The custom cab F-100 came with the same engine options as other F-100s, the 240 cubic inch six-cylinder with 150 horsepower, and V8s including the 352 and 390 cubic options. But Ford added luxury features that created massive problems. The custom cab included more insulation, sound dampening, upgraded interior materials, and additional trim. All of this added weight, about 300 pounds more than a standard F-100. This extra weight overwhelmed the already marginal twin I-beam suspension. The front end sagged, wore out ball joints even faster, and created dangerous handling characteristics. The air conditioning system, optional but popular on custom cabs, was notoriously unreliable. Compressors would fail, hoses would leak, and the system would freeze up. Repairs were expensive and often unsuccessful. The power steering system, standard on custom cabs, leaked constantly. The pump would whine, the steering box would develop play, and the hoses would burst under pressure.